Hello and welcome to week two, day four of the spring 2026 programming with C Sharp course. So first, we just kind of wanted to go over, some reminders, housekeeping items. As far as grading's concerned, it may take me a few days to grade assignments. Every week I probably should be done. Probably the end of the day, Wednesday. There might be some other times it goes, beyond that. I am teaching two courses this week. This is just one of two. So, I could get hung up on something here and there. Might go past that. So to see what, maybe if some points were deducted or whatever, please go look at, once it is graded, you can go out there and there'll be some comments on there about the assignment. Also wanted to mention next Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So there'll be no lectures, but assignments will be available Monday morning. I'm not sure if I'm going to actually do move the lectures to Tuesday and Wednesday or record one of them. I haven't decided that yet, but I'll let you know that ahead of time. So yeah, I did kind of want to just mention about holidays. So just in general, we kind of do for the most part, it's just kind of business as usual. It's kind of up to you to decide what holidays you want to observe or not. And even some, basically, one of the benefits of the online thing is you can make any day you want really a holiday. Any day that you've got things to do or whatever you want to take time off, you just do it, right? It's all about, for the online course, it's all about completing your work for attendance reasons. So a lot different than on in-person classes. If you're attending an in-person class at like Rankin Technical College at the St. Louis campus, basically if you don't come to class that day, you're going to be, any day that's not a holiday, you're going to be marked as absent, right? So, but works differently for the online courses. And I did want to mention that, even though kind of like in a way holidays don't count, but you do get this course will end a few days before the in-person class. So it's not like you're getting gypped or anything, right? Just kind of wanted to mention that. So real quick here, week one in review. So just kind of want to go through, things that you accomplished last week, right? So, all students were able to submit their assignments into GitHub remote repository, which is fantastic. And as far as, other things what happened, as far as development and environment tools. So you set up your environment last week. You got Visual Studio 2026 installed and learned some basic navigation and functions there. Created your GitHub account. You cloned your classroom repository on your local machine. And you were able to submit, push code to the remote repository using GitHub Desktop. Right? Kind of learned how to create console apps. Learned about the solution. Learned how to create a solution and manage multiple projects within a single solution. Learned a little bit. We're going to be continuing on. You're going to learn a lot more about variables and constants and so forth, but you learned a little bit about variables like an integer and a double, etc., right? Learned about constants, introduced a constant variable that, once you set them, they cannot change, right? Input, output, learn the basic of interaction using a read line for input and a write line for output. So, a lot was accomplished last week. You should feel, you should be proud of yourself, feel really good about it, okay? So as far as this week, assignments this week, it's going to be a little bit more than last week. We had a shortened week, plus, everybody just getting acclimated, especially new students getting acclimated and, getting your environment set up and everything. So you're ready to roll, move forward now. So we're going to have our first hands-on test, okay? And a little bit about that. So generally, like the in-person classes, the way that works is usually they get their hands-on test assigned at the beginning of the day, and it's due at the end of the day. So I've never made it that strict, just because some people work full time and other reasons. that someone might not be able to jump on something. So generally, I usually give a few days. I have I know like last semester, I think almost all of my stuff was never due in the middle of the week. So I probably need to send a note to all of my students that this is their second semester and they had me last semester, because we're going to be doing some stuff that's going to be due in the middle of the week. So your first hands-on test is due Wednesday by midnight. So basically, got all day today, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, right? So and it's not harder than the previous one you did for the lab assignment. Okay, if anything, it's probably easier, especially because you already did the other one. But I'm going to go ahead and go through that real quick here in a little bit. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And other assignments, so chapter 3 and 4 written test. Now I know you don't have a book yet. Actually, I talked to the bookstore this morning, and so hopefully by the end of the day, I'm going to have all the code stuff figured out. All the codes figured out, and hopefully you'll have a book. But I did want to mention with these written tests, basically those guides that I created, they'll get you almost all the way there. I mean, I think they will get you all the way there. I shouldn't even say most of the way there. Basically, those guides, and we're going to look at that again here in the syllabus. If you look through that, it'll get you. I'm not saying you need to read it from start to end, but kind of we'll get through it a little bit. I'm going to be going through them. But if you kind of go through that, pretty much everything that's in the written test is going to be there. Okay, so just wanted to mention that. And then also we're going to have chapter 4 labs. And in addition to that, our first Maui lab. And so Mr. Gudmestead, he is the instructor, downtown St. Louis. So he created videos on all the different Maui labs. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well, because one thing I do want to mention about the Maui lab is he was obviously, because Visual Studio 2026 is just started. So when he recorded those, it was the previous version. And for the Visual Studio, that goes all the way back to 2022, okay? So that's just how Microsoft do it. They don't have every year have a new version. Their previous version from 26 was 2022, right? Not that they don't have updates along the way, right? But that's just how they do that. I don't know if they'll change that in the future, but so a lot of what's in that Maui lab was 22, so you don't want to download anything again, okay? You probably want to do some other things that he mentions, but you already have what you need to do the Maui labs in the Visual Studio 2026 if you followed the environment setup, okay? As far as today, going to do a quick syllabus review. I'm going to walk through the hands-on test number 1, HOT, hot. That's what also hands-on test. That's what we kind of call it as well. Review chapter 2 concepts. Kind of just want to go through a few of those concepts because we didn't really do any exercises, labs regarding window forms. We just really did the prompts, the console apps, I should say, the console apps. And then I'm going to go ahead and lecture over chapter 3. And I'm going to walk through the guide number 3. And like I said, that guide number 3 will really help you both. And you do have the chapter, you do have the PDF chapter 3, and that guide will help you with that written test. And also I want to show you in our repository, on your local repository, we have some other folders there, and we have one on the different book apps under the developer download. And you can kind of use them to look at as examples and stuff, but they need to be fixed. And I'll show you how to fix them so you can use those. Okay. Okay, so here's a syllabus, the course schedule. Obviously, this is from last week. And what I'm gonna really want to try to do is, I used to, the course I taught last semester, actually multiple courses I've taught in the past, I always did the emails and that. So I'd rather kind of try to really work on this syllabus driving everything. And so if you could just please bookmark this. So If if you want to know what's going on in the class, if there's any extra resources or anything for your assignments, try to come to the syllabus for that week, okay? And so I'm going to try to get away from, sending emails every Monday morning and that, because it's kind of redundant to a certain, from certain perspective there. And as far as these, like anybody who comes to a live lecture, this is the same link. I'm using the same link every week. So once you have that, you can actually even do that. You can actually save your link, bookmark your link. So, okay. So yeah, this was for last week, and obviously I had this number 3 guide. We never got to this. I had question marks. I even had this from last week because I didn't know if we'd get there, and we didn't get there. So I'm going to be lecturing over 3 today. But here's chapter 2. You're already done with the test, but it's still beneficial to go through this if you have the time. Just kind of glance through it, just because it got some concept. And I'm going to actually go through it just a little bit here today. And then here's the one for chapter 3. All right. So here's our week 2 assignments, a hands-on test, due by Wednesday by midnight. And sometimes you'll see inside ranking different times. Basically, everything's just due by midnight, okay? Anytime I assign something, it's always going to be by midnight, even if it says 11:30 or whatever. And sometimes I actually change those times because to make sure that list inside ranking, if I change the time and one's due after another, it'll show it'll show it in kind of the correct order, the suggested order of completing those tasks. So sometimes it doesn't always work unless I kind of change the times so that one will be before the other. So if you go out there inside ranking right now, the first one on there should be the hands-on test. Then the written test. So yeah, I do suggest this week, if you could, I think a good order for the assignments would be knock out this hands-on test. Then go through. I should have a textbook for you. So read, go through the textbook stuff. Also, you've got the guides as well. Okay. Complete the written test for chapter 3 and the one for chapter 4. Get them knocked out. Then go ahead and go on to these labs a little. Then go on to this lab, chapter 4 lab. And then at the end, we've got this Maui. And Mr. Gudminstead did the different Maui tutorials. And I'll probably put some notes in this assignment too, just in case people don't see this in the video. But, like I said a little bit ago, he was using Visual Studio 2022, so, because 26 just came out. So that's what he was using. And I think he was using where you've got like the different methods where you had to have the namespace and the name of had a main method and all that, where you don't have to do that anymore. But you could follow along and do exactly what he does, or you might be able to skip some of that. Just let me know on this, how this goes. I'm interested to see how this goes for you guys, and we can talk about that later. And then here's just the quick guides for this week, chapter 3 and chapter 4. And, just as a review, I will, every week before, Monday morning, I'll have this updated, hopefully updated. If not, you can yell at me. But I should have the one for the next week updated. But, I wouldn't go too far ahead here because things will change here and there, okay? So the current week should be correct at this point, right? All right. So that's that. What was else was on my list here? Okay, walk through the hot. So here's the hands-on test. And first I want to mention a lot of students, the students that did this last semester know this, but like for a hands-on test, I can't really help you with this. If you have a lab assignment, yes, I can help you with the lab assignment. If you run into something, you can say, hey, can you look at this? But for the hands-on test, you kind of really, if you have any questions about the directions, that's fine. I can help you with the directions. But as far as getting your code to work, this ain't compiling, something's not working here, I'm getting errors. You're going to have to work through that yourself. Okay. I think I will go ahead though here, and later in this lecture, I will go ahead and create this just to kind of review this, create the solution and add all the projects. But that's all I'm going to do. Okay. Just because, you only did that once. And so I'll go ahead and do that. All right. But it is important that you call things the right thing, name things the correct way as it states here. Okay, if it says, it needs to be called this, you need to call it that, like right here. All 3 projects are included in a single solution. Name this. It has to be named that, right? But this is kind of pretty straightforward. This first one's, all you're doing is saying hello with your name, right? Pretty basic. Okay, I don't know how it could be. If you could do the other labs, this is a piece of cake. It'd take you a minute to do this one, right? A couple minutes maybe. So here you're doing a little bit of, asking. You're going to be asking for some numbers, right? You're going to be prompting for some numbers, and then you're going to be writing out, do some an average, add them together, right? And do an average of those numbers, and then you're going to go ahead and display that. Exercise 3. Here you're going to be requesting some information from the user: name, street address, city, state, zip code, quantity of t-shirts ordered at $14.99 each. So display all input data in a clear and organized format, similar to the example below, right? Calculate and display the following: total price, sales price, amount due. Okay. So, this one will be, a little bit more, but I think it's doable. Okay. I think that the lab that you already did last week is probably enough to get you this done. Help you get this done. So, all right. So that's it. I don't think this is too bad. This shouldn't take you all the way. If somebody can start today or even tomorrow, I don't think this will take you all the way until Wednesday. So please don't know if you have any questions on instructions here. But like I said, as far as help from the instructor, I can't help you if you've got an error. You're gonna have to work through that yourself. Okay. And I do want to mention, hands-on tests are worth a lot of your grade. If you remember, we did showed you the grade weightings. Hands-on tests are worth a lot. It's very important. There's only a handful of those, right, throughout the semester. So it's very important to do well on hands-on tests. As opposed to labs, there's a lot of labs. Okay. It's better, it's more important to do good on your hands-on test than your lab. Obviously, if you did bad on a whole bunch of labs, yeah, that's going to impact your grade a lot. But, on a one-by-one basis, one hands-on test is worth a lot more than one lab. Okay, so it's very important to do well on the hands-on test. All right. Let me look at my list. Probably should have my list in a different window instead of keep on going back here. All right. Review chapter 2 concepts, and we're going to lecture on 3. Okay, so let's look at this again. So just remember, like in Visual Studio, we have these different, views that you can have open, right? So we had like the Solution Explorer. We've got a toolbox. Okay, remember how to kind of get those working again. We'll be taking a look here at that later. The biggest things I want to really point out here. So common form controls. So if you remember in the toolbox, you had common form controls. And so here's some of the more common ones: label, a text box, button. So we've done all well, we haven't, we talked about all three of these. I kind of went through that a little bit, but you haven't had a chance to do that on your own yet. Label, text box, and button. There's other ones as well. There's a lot more. These are kind of some of the more common ones. Checkbox. Well, checkbox, you can either be on or off. Checkbox, right? A radio button. That's kind of the little circle one, right? Radio button. Usually a radio button, you're going to either have it, you can't unselect a radio button, right? Usually with a radio button, you have multiple there. You select one or the other, right? A combo box is kind of drop down with a list of options. For those who were in the HTML course already, it's similar to a select statement, right? So here's some of the essential properties. Every form and control has properties that determine its appearance and behavior. Two properties are common to both forms and controls. Having a name property specifies the name you use to refer to the control in your C# code. And the other one is, and it must be unique within the form. Okay, must be unique. Here is the text property, determines the text displayed in the control that you're viewing on the page, right? Okay, and this is just showing how you can disable something, right? Disable and enable. So for button.calculate, this is like a calculate button, enabled, false, right? Or if you want to have it disabled, sometimes you want to have it disabled, and you could have some logic where based on them doing something else, you make it enabled, right? So remember, disabled is different than read-only. So for text box controls, the read-only property prevents users from entering or editing data while still allowing them to select and copy the text. Okay, and the control appears with a gray background. All right, I didn't want to go through all of that. So here's some quick references to the different properties. It's important to understand all of these. You're going to be working with all of these. Did want to go over naming conventions a little bit. Students sometimes struggle with this. You really want to make sure you kind of call things. So for text boxes, when you name something, you should like underscore txt and then the name. Give it a unique name. Okay. If not, it's going to use a default name. And especially like controls, you'll have label 1, label 2, label 3. Well, when you got 12 controls on your thing, trying to figure out which one's which label, which text box is which text box, because it's just gonna add numbers to these, right? So you'll have text box 1, text box 2, text box 3. You really need to, you really need to name them so that you know what they are, right? So here's an example. For text box, you starting with txt. For labels, starting with lbl. With button, starting with btn, right? Checkbox, chk. For radio buttons, rad. A combo box, cbo. There's also other ones as far, as well, that, we haven't talked about or seen, is list box. Start with the lst. And form, the name of your form, start with the frm, okay? And just remember, these are names that you use to refer to them in your code. These are not names that you'll see right there on the UI screen, right? That's not, that's for, that's the name thing, right? The name you give it. Here, these are for, that you can actually access them within your code. You can access them within your code saying, hey, give me the text first name, right? Update this, update that, right? Based on these, right? Tab order determines the order in which controls receive focus when the user presses the tab key. All right, and this is crucial for keyboard navigation and accessibility. So we talk about accessibility. What we're really talking about, some accessibility. Some people may be visually impaired. They, or they can't, they don't know what, you can't see to click on it. But when you can have keyboard, other ways to access things, right? Because there's also screen readers that'll read things, right? And it'll go to the next field, and it'll tell you by you doing that, it'll logically go from one to another, and it helps with like screen readers and things like that. If someone's like visually impaired or have some other challenges, okay, that's all about accessibility, right? So how tab order works: each control has a tab index, one through whatever. Controls receive focus in ascending order. First one's 0, then 1, 2, etc. Right? Lower numbers receive focus first. Controls with the same tab index follow their order in the form. So yeah, if you have a tab index of 3 different ones have a 1, it's going to just follow however the form is laid out on the screen. Setting the tab order. So you have different ways. You can do select view, tab order. We've done this before. Number appears for each control, and then you can change the numbers, right? Then to set that, you have to make sure to set that, you have to select this again, and that will save them and exit from that, right? Method 2 is a properties window. So for each control, you have the properties window at your bottom right, and then you can go ahead and find the tab index and enter the desired number. And then all those tab stop property to prevent a control from receiving focus when user presses a tab, set its tab stop property to false. This is useful for read-only text boxes or labels. Okay. Also, we looked at access keys. And I know a lot of this stuff actually was on the written test as well. So access keys let users activate or a control by pressing the Alt plus another key, right? So here you've got for a calculate, right? So if on the screen, you can tell on the screen if you see the displayed text is being underlined, right? If you use an ampersand before that, it will make that underline there. The access key for that is Alt-C, right? Etc. here, right? Here, if you do, if you put it after the E, but before the X, it's going to underline the X itself, right? Same as all these other ones as well. Okay. Default buttons. Forms have special buttons. All right. Yeah. So yeah, the accept button, this is important. So the button that's activated when the user presses the enter key. If you hit enter key, that's what will be executed, right? Typically set to the primary action button, usually an OK or calculate or whatever. But for usually a cancel button or an exit button, right? That's going to activate when the user presses. You can press the EXE, the escape key at the top on your keyboard, or click it on the screen, right? But these were the keyboard shortcuts. So keyboard shortcut for accept button is enter. For the cancel, it is the ESC key. All right. A lot of this we're going to go through. I just wanted to kind of so here's some nice little cheat sheet down here. If you want to customize the IDE, go to Tools, Options, change development settings, which you probably won't need to do, but they ask. That was a question on the test. Create new project. So different ways, you can come in and just create a new project. We were, for the console apps, we create a solution and then kind of did it from there. You can always do it from within the Visual Studio without doing a solution, but you can just go to Tools, go to File, New Project. I'm sorry, that was this one here. So to open the toolbox, view toolbox, and this is important because a lot of times, it happens every semester. Students ask me, so all of a sudden I can't find my controls. They're not there. Well, sometimes they go away. And so you do want to pin them. Once you start using a lot of Windows stuff, it'll kind of remembers what you did before. Usually they'll be there. But if you ever not have it, to get to Toolbox, you go to the View. So you go to the View, Toolbox, View to Properties window. And there's also shortcuts like F4 key. So that will open the properties, because that one's always important, because you make a lot of changes in that properties. That's the one at the bottom on the right, right? Toolbars all the way on the left. To set the tab order, if you want to do it that way, so you want to do it on the GUI itself, you go to View Tab Order. To select multiple controls, you hold the control plus click each control. So you can hold down the control and just click each one, or you can do that lasso thing, and we'll review that. We'll see that again here. Align controls. So you format align and you choose your alignment. All right. Access key, we already talked about that. Yeah, and there's some, we'll need to rename some things, so we'll be doing a little bit of this. All right. That's it for that. Let me see here. All right. Next, let's go through this. So it talks about using indentation and blank lines to make the code easier to read. Use comments to document the code. Use any of the help features to get information that you need for developing an app. I don't know about going through all of these snippets, refactoring. Okay, let me just move on here actually. So actually, so this is the invoice form, invoice total. And so this is kind of an example book app, and we kind of went through this a little bit in chapter 2. So it has this in multiple I think it's just 2 and 3, and it moves on to other apps after that. So this we're going to take a look at this, and what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to bring up the one that's the book app, and I'm going to show you how to because it's already there within your GitHub repository. I just don't need to show you how you can update the .NET version, because if you bring it up, it's going to give you an error because it doesn't have that .NET version, and you don't want to install all those older ones. You don't need to. We just need to update that to a newer version. So let's just talk about class and object concepts. So an object is a self-contained unit, like a form or a control, that combines code and data. Okay. A class is the code that defines the characteristics of an object. You can think of a class as a template for an object. Okay. A class as a blueprint. Okay. Think of a class as a blueprint. Okay. A blueprint to create objects. Okay. The class defines all the characteristics of an object, and then you use that class as a blueprint to create an object. Okay. An object is called an instance of a class. Okay. These are object-oriented programming concepts. An object is an instance of a class, and the process of creating an object from a class is called instantiation, right? So you instantiate a class, right? From a class. You instantiate an object. More than one object can be created from a single class. Okay. So once you have a class, you can you can recreate it, create a new one, create another new one, create another new one. Okay. So you can have multiple objects running. It's all part of object-oriented programming. And I guess I will mention, because last semester, when we did the JavaScript from last semester, JavaScript's not really a true object-oriented programming. It's not a class base. It uses prototypes as opposed to classes. But C# is a class class object-oriented programming language. Okay, it's class-based. So property, methods, and event concepts. Properties define the characteristics of an object and the data associated with an object. Okay, so a property could be a color, right? It could be a size. It could be, it's characteristics. It's certain attributes that define that object and or data about that object. Okay, methods are the operations the object can perform. Okay, so let's say you've got a car object, right? A car can drive, a car can brake. These are all methods. Could do these different things. So methods are the operations the object can perform. What's all the object, a car can perform, or, say an animal, right? A certain kind of animal can eat, right? It can drink. It can do all kinds of different things, right? Events are signals sent by an object to the app telling it that something has happened that can be responded to. Okay, events are signals sent by an object. Properties, methods, and events can be referred to as members of an object. Okay, they're all members of an object. If you instantiate two or more instances of the same class, all objects have the same properties, methods, and events. Okay. One thing I don't like about it saying that, but that's okay. I'm not going to talk about that right now. All right, so here's a member list in a code editor. It's just showing you a button click event, right? And here's the code for that. Some of these things are not really very helpful, and I'd rather just go through the code itself. Common controls and events. So this is kind of important. Click and double click, enter, leave. So control events. So any kind of a control, right? A button. It can it can be a label. It can be a button, a label, a text box, right? You could have click, double click, enter, leave, all associated with like control events, right? The different controls. For a form, though, a form gets loaded. The form is that whole GUI, right? That form is that whole thing, right? You have load, you have closing. So you can do certain things on closing. Let's say you've got a form up and somebody enters data, they forget they forget to save something. Let's say you have a form that saves something. They start putting in data and then they just try to close the form. Well, then is you're going to catch that on closing, right? On closing, say, hey, well, you've got data you haven't saved. Do you want to save it, right? So you could have like an alert come up on that, right? Closed is after the form's been closed. Sometimes forms may be using like a database, or they could be using some different resources, and so that's a good way. That's the right time to clean anything up. So like whenever something's like connected to a database, you should, and you'll learn this as we're continue with programming here. If you've got a resource that you're accessing, a lot of times some of the resource, especially database stuff, you have a database connection, right? So that connection's active while you're using it. Well, you don't just want to, cut it off. You want to properly close it. There's a proper way to close things like that, okay? All right. So how does application response to events? To indicate how an app should respond to an event, you code an event handler. Okay, to connect the event handler to the event, Visual Studio wires the event to the event handler. This is known as event wiring. This method handles the click event. Yes. Okay. So we'll end up, when we start getting into these, so like this is the click event handler, and we'll end up going in there and start coding, adding code. We might put an if statement. If discount percent is this or that, we might want to do different things, right? Or, is it empty or whatever, right? We'll look at all these different things here. All right. I don't want to go through, this ain't really that helpful. We can just go in and look at it. All right. So I do want to go, this is going to be a little redundant, but this can be very helpful for you as well. So you do have access to those slides. It's all within the GitHub repository. But also, you got these guides you can look at. So this is the one for chapter 3. Kind of the same thing here, right? This C# is an object-oriented programming language. Understanding these fundamental concepts is essential for writing window forms applications, right? So here's, definition of a class, code that defines the characteristic of an object, right? So think of it as a blueprint or a template. So there you go. We already discussed all this, but I'm just saying, just another resource for you, and this could really help you with the written test. Basically, you get to that written test, you look, you can't find something in there. You can kind of maybe search in here. You probably should be able to find it, okay? Almost everything should be in here. So I was just talking to you about what a class is, what an object is, right? Right? An object is an instance of a class, right? The act of creating that object is called instantiating, right? The process of creating an object from a class. So here's going to show you different class members, define several types of members that can give objects their capabilities, right? A property, a method, an event. So here's an example. A property is a text name.text is the property of that control, right? A method would be the name of that method, .focus. Focus is putting focus into that field, right? If you want to, when you come into a form, generally, you usually want to have focus in that first field, the first field that's important, right? You want to put focus in that. You don't want to have to come into a form and somebody have to click into that field. It should already be there, right? Where you'll see the little cursor in there. Event signals that something happened, user action, a click, a load event, right? Clicks are very important. We do a lot of click, but there's also load event, and there's others as well. All right. Accessing object members. To refer to a property or method in your C#, use dot notation, right? The name, your object name, followed by a period, followed by the property or method name. So here you've got a name, right? To get it to, you created this variable name of type string, and to get the property value, you need to do text name dot text. It has to be uppercase, right? Setting a property value, right? So label dot text. So we're going to be doing some of this stuff, and and sometimes you'll have a label on your thing, and you want to dynamically change that label based on other things, right? To do that, you find what's the name of your label, and you do a dot text on that and set it to the string name, all right? Syntax for methods, right? Calling a method with no parameters. So text monthly investment.focus, right? So this is, and a lot of times, so you can tell by these names, and it's very helpful for you too when you program, like I was talking about the naming conventions. You want to, text field, you want to start with a TXT, right? Labels, LBL. It really helps you in your code, right? You start having other things. Well, one is if you name it the wrong stuff, It's almost better to have the default names than to call it something you don't know. You can't tell by looking at the name of it if it's a label or a button or whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you always have it so you can say, oh, yeah, that's a label. Yes, that's a text box, right, etc. Or text field, not a text box, text field. Um, but, you really don't want a form, like I said earlier, with 50, you have, a form that has 15 different labels, and one's label 1, label 2, label 3, right? You want to give them unique names, starting with the LBL at the beginning, right? So, and this is how you close a form, right? So you could have a button. When they click that exit button, you're going to call this method, right? The event's going to be, you're going to have an event on that button click that's going to say this dot close, right? You may do checks for some things on that too. You may check at that point, and that's, at that point you want to maybe check, hey, well, is there something that's left undone here? Do we have any, kind of alerts we wanted to display to the user before they close it? A lot of times, are you sure you want to close this? Yes, things like that, right? The this keyword, we'll talk about this. It can be a little bit confusing here. So, but this keyword refers to the current instance of the class, right? The current form. Use this dot close to close the current form. Sometimes things you could be using, working with multiple forms at once. And we'll learn a lot about objects and how you could have multiple objects at the same time. So you want to close one specific one, or you want to refer to one specific one, the one that you're working on right now. You have to use this keyword. We'll get into this a lot more, right? We'll get into this concept a lot more later. So events and event handlers, we're already talking about the different event handlers. So an event handler is a method that responds to events. When the event occurs, the corresponding event handler code executes. So creating event handlers, the easiest way to create an event handler is to double click the control in the form designer. And I do want to review something, and I don't know if it changed with the newer version of Visual Studio Code, but sometimes if you if you do a lot of things, you're going to accidentally double click stuff that you didn't mean to double click, and it's going to do some things. So, and if you decide that you need to get rid of some things, you used to have to do that very carefully, because the form stuff, when you create this form stuff, the frame, the whole platform, right, the .NET platform, kind of does some things under the hood that it creates things, right? There's a whole bunch of files that get created, like you already seen when you did your console app, created object directory, all these other ones, the stuff that we don't want to check in, right? But it creates a whole bunch of different things, and so sometimes when you do something by accident, sometimes you have to clean that up in a certain way. If not, it'll cause errors. Okay. I'm going to test that and see if that's the case, and we'll make sure we review that. I might actually even just do a separate video just on that scenario, just because it happens to so many people, and if you delete it in the wrong way, also you'll start getting a bunch of errors, and so it can really slow you down. So Visual Studio generates the event handler skeleton code automatically, right? And that's what I was kind of talking about. It creates that automatically. You didn't mean to create it, and then later on you say, you're in your code and you got all these things, and you start deleting them. You can have problems because just how Visual Studio designs that, and there's references to that from somewhere else. And if you just kind of delete that event handler, the button click event, you can have some problems. So, like I said, I'm going to check that out, and then if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and actually probably set a separate video on that, because I don't want you getting stuck on something like that and wonder what the heck's going on here. So basically, and when you got an event handler, you're going to add your code inside the curly braces for that event handler, right? So Here's an event handler. Naming conventions. Visual Studio automatically names event handlers using this pattern. Button, calculate, click, right? Depends on what you have your things named though, right? Button, calculate, click, button, exit, click. And so on a button, calculate, click, you're going to do all your kinds of, you're going to probably have some variables here. You're going to do some calculations here, right? Multiplication, adding, dividing, etc., right? You're going to do some different calculations, right? Based on that. What this kind of all means here, so this is just a typical stuff, object sender, it always has this, and it has event args. Args, this is kind of an event handler stuff, so all of them will have this, okay? You don't have to worry about too much of this at this point, okay? Probably a little bit on these, we'll be talking about this a lot more. But this is who the sender is, who the sender of the object was, of this click button, who sent this, right? But this here, first thing is private. So that means private within that class. So something outside of that class, because we're going to see in the future where you can have multiple different classes. And if something's private, that means it only can be executed within that class itself. Now, obviously, how Windows Forms is all wired together, that don't mean that you can't click it when you click it on that form, right? It will, it will execute this, right? But it's just saying that a different class cannot access this. It has to be accessed within the class itself, right? Void means it doesn't return anything, okay? That doesn't mean, okay, you will set, but within here, where your code goes, this is where you might say, you'll put that data maybe in a label, or you'll be putting that data in a label, or you may put it in a text field, okay? So you'll do all that here. You'll refer to your text box, and then you'll be able to assign values to that based on your button click. That's how those values get there, okay? And here's just an example of an exit button where you're doing this dot close, okay? So it's basically saying this form, this object, this form, close this, okay? Statements and blocks. So a statement terminator is a semicolon, okay? Every C statement must end in a semicolon. Kind of already learned this already. Haven't done much on code blocks yet. So we were kind of doing it, we were writing the code kind of the newer way for our console apps, where you didn't have to have the main method and with the namespace and all that stuff. You could just start writing your code, right? So, but when we start doing these buttons and other stuff, you will see a lot more curly braces, right? You're going to have curly braces when you do that, right? So always remember, when you have a start curly brace, you have to have an end curly brace. When you have a start parentheses, you have to have an end parentheses, okay? So method calls are going to have a parentheses, and these are the things that are passed into your method you created. This is the name of your method, right? This is the name of your method. It has a void, like I said, means it returns nothing, okay? Private means it only is accessible within the class itself, okay? And these are the things that are being passed into that method, okay? Now, you may not need to worry about a lot of things, but this is just the basic wiring that kind of goes on with window forms, okay? So you don't want to delete this. You always want this to be there. Very important, right? So in this example, you're creating a decimal of total. And so for numbers, numeric numbers, you always want to use a decimal, and you always want to use an M at the end of it, okay? So this is just a decimal total. It's basically a static field You know, this could be a const here actually, right? Because you're not really changing it. But, you know, most of the time when you do something, you're going to be doing some calculations and stuff like that, right? But so here's the total. And then here, what you're doing is taking your total to string, right? And this was actually going to create an amount from that. And C is for, let's see, let's stay right here. But C is for currency, right? So this is going to convert that to a currency, right? And it's going to be a string. So you're doing a to string on this. So you're taking this decimal. So whenever you have a decimal, whenever you have a different type besides a string, you're always going to have to do a conversion to get it back, because everything on your form, right? Everything on your form is a string, okay? Everything's a string. You know, some of those controls are kind of, you know, I should watch how I say that, but all the values that you populate on your form are going to be string values. Kind of the same with what we did, you know, like basically if you know HTML, you know, everything on an HTML page is going to be a string as well, right? When you submit that, you know, when you do something with that, you might convert that to a different type to do a calculation, right? And it's kind of the same thing here as well, okay? But in this case, so you need to make sure that whatever you assign, since this is a string, all of these are always strings, right? You have to make sure that this is a string, okay? You can't not assign this to a decimal or an int or anything like that, right? So it has to be in a string format. Different ways to get it to that, but it needs to be a string format. Code formatting best practices. So well-formatted code is easy to read, understand, and maintain. Follow these guides. Indentation. Use indentation to align related elements of code. Right? Code inside braces should be indented one level. So yeah, you want to be careful where you don't have, you know, you have a method and you have your first line indented 2 spaces, your next one 4, and you know, have them all over the place. You want to make sure you have consistent indentation. Blank lines. Use blank lines before and after groups of related statements to visually separate logical sections. Okay. Blank lines are just ignored, right? The only thing they're important for is readability, right? Blank lines are about readability. The compiler, right? So for C#, everything's compiled. Even though you don't realize that, right? When you did your console app and you hit the little green thing to run that, what that does actually under the hood, it actually compiles it, right? It takes that code, you know, in human format. You're writing the code in human format. Even though early on you're seeing all that code, it doesn't look very readable maybe at the beginning because you're learning, but, you know, that is, you know, human readable code. And what it does under the hood there, it's going to take that and it's going to convert that to a machine-friendly code for a machine-friendly format, so it can run that. Okay, because the computer doesn't know what to do with that. It doesn't know what to do with human-readable code. Right? It has to be in a format it understands. Right? Spacing. You use spaces to separate words, values, and operators for better readability. You just have to make sure, like variable names, remember all the rules with variables. If you don't and you probably should review that a little bit, right? You know, you can't have a space in a variable name, right? Certain things are allowed, certain things aren't allowed. So it's good idea to know that, because if not, you know, you create a variable name the wrong way, it's going to be an error, right? It's not going to work. So here I did want to mention this. And I believe there's a question on the Chapter 3 written test. And there's a question on there. And I know that for like the console apps, we had like all uppercase letters, and you know that used to be used extensively, and I guarantee, you know, you go working, you work somewhere, you know, if you work any kind of a big company or that, very likely you're going to run into variables that are going to be all uppercase. So a lot of times for like constants, right, you had all uppercase letters. And the reason kind of for that was, you know, at one point in time, there wasn't the const keyword, the const keyword. So there wasn't available. So to be able to look at your code easily for readability as a programmer, you know, a lot of developers, you know, it's kind of became very common practice for any kind of a constant to make it all uppercase, right? To make it all uppercase, usually, you know, with underlines in between each word, right? But all uppercase, right? So that you could look and say, oh, yeah, I understand that that's a constant, right? Otherwise, you really couldn't tell, you know, if it would be a constant. It was just an easy way to look at it very quickly. Say, oh yeah, this must be a constant, unless you know the developer wrote it wrong, right? The developer might have kind of done things differently, but you know, basically that was kind of the premise there. And usually you had them defined more at the top of your code. Here's all your constants, right? And that's always the best practice, no matter what. You should even, you know, even if you're not using all uppercase, you know, you probably your constants you kind of keep at the top of your block of code, right? So if you got constants that you're only using within that method, you know, you probably should, you know, have that at the top of your method. If it's at your class, you probably want that at the top of your class, right? And we'll learn and talk about that more in the future. But you know, it's not a big deal. I don't care if you use all capital letters for your constants, just because I'm so used to it and I've kind of done it. And I know that there's some exercises in our you know exercises in our coursework that are going to tell you to name it all uppercase like that, like they're just you know like we had in our console labs. But I don't care either way. I'm just kind of mentioning it's kind of stated here for. And I think there's a question in the test that's not recommended. Common practice for code readability to have uppercase letters, okay, for variable names. Comments. So comments document your code and are ignored by the compiler. Okay, they don't affect how your application runs or anything. So if you're just going to do one, you start 2 forward slashes. That's just one single line. It's always good to document your code where needed, right? You don't want to overly document your code. You don't want to say this is doing this is doing that if it's obvious what it's doing. But sometimes, you know, you may want to, you know, document your code. Some people, you know, here's my constant variables. We'll have them listed. You know, that's not bad. But, you know, is it necessary? No. But you want to make sure that there's times when you comment your code and times when you don't, you know, sometimes, you know, you don't want to get too carried away with that. Okay. Multi-line comments. So this is a multi-line comment. For a multi-line comment, you start with a forward slash and use the asterisk, right? And then in between there, you can pretty much have anything except, you know, once you do this, that ends that, right? So that's how you do that. So a single line is going to be the 2 forward slashes. So them are just brief notes or end of line. Sometimes you can comment at the end of a line just to explain what something's doing on that single line, or you know, or you can do it at the top of the line or at the end of the line. Multi-line is like that, and this is just talking about XML documentation. So don't have to worry about that right now. I'm not sure if we'll be doing much with that. Maybe some of the Maui stuff. All right. Comments can appear at the end of a line or on their own line. They can contain any text, including C# keywords. You know, you can put anything in there. However, comments can become inaccurate or out of date if not maintained. Always update comments when you change your code. Okay. Code snippets. A code snippet is a template that inserts commonly used code structures. Instead of typing everything from scratch, you can use a snippet to quickly add code. We'll look into that a little bit here in the future. All right. The idea of refactoring. So refactoring is a process of restructuring existing code without changing its behavior. So Visual Studio provides built-in refactoring tools. Okay, and the importance of refactoring is because sometimes sometimes you may come in to you have some assignment. Let's say you're working in a company and you got an assignment to add some functionality to some program, and you go into this program and you look and it's, oh my gosh, this is a bunch of spaghetti code, a bunch of stuff going on all over the place here, and you've got the knowledge and skills that I can do a lot, but I can clean this up a lot, right? So obviously you don't want to clean up stuff without making sure you're approved to do some because sometimes places they say, well, let's just leave it like it is, because everything always has to be tested, right? Remember, we work somewhere, anything always has to be tested, so you don't want to change a bunch of stuff and then all of a sudden it gets to production because you didn't test every possibility, because it's really not, there's a process that's involved in all organizations to make sure for code quality and that things get tested, right? But let's say you go into this program, you say, this code's all messed up, and you talk to your supervisor or whomever, and it's yeah, why don't you go ahead and clean that up? And so refactoring is changing that. You don't want to change the behavior. The behavior needs to stay the same, but you're just kind of cleaning up the code before you add some new stuff, right? So that's a good reason for refactoring. Or you're using some kind of a framework or stuff, and all of a sudden we're gonna get rid of that framework and do a different framework. So you need to refactor your code, right? Understanding errors. There's two main types of errors you'll encounter when developing C# applications. There's syntax errors. Okay, these are build errors, right? A lot of these build errors, you're gonna know this all within Visual Studio itself, because usually it's gonna highlight it for you, right? So you see all the little red squiggly lines, right? So you'll see it when you type or when you build. Okay, if for some reason your editor wasn't doing that, because that stuff could be disabled, it can be disabled, or for some reason I don't know, could get past that for some reason or another. So when you build it, and when I say build it, and I'll show you how you can actually just build your application without running it as well, right? You can just build it to make sure it builds without running it. But kind of lost my train of thought there. So when you if there's a problem, it's not gonna run, right? It's not gonna run if you try to just run it, and so you need to fix those, right? A runtime error. When is it detected? When application runs. Okay, everything looked good. No squiggly lines. Everything was great, and then you went ahead and executed it, and then you got some kind of an error. That's called a runtime error, right? That's called an exception. Syntax error is called a build error. Okay, so causes is basically you're violating the C# language rules. Typos, missing a semicolon, a parentheses, a curly brace, taking a constant and trying to give it, change the value of a constant. You can't do that, right? So that's what causes that. So runtime error, problem prevents statements execution. Things that prevent that, you can't divide by 0. Okay. Invalid input. You have a text field and you didn't convert it, or instead of entering something it was expecting, you entered something different. and it went ahead and blew up. Right? It was supposed to be a text field. It was supposed to be something where you had an image upload, and you end up putting text in there, and so it blew up. It didn't know what to do with that. Right? So where is it shown? A syntax error is shown in the code editor, little red squiggly lines, and also the error list window. Okay, exceptions. There's usually a dialog box that comes up saying that this is an error has occurred. Right? Can the app run? No, you must fix it. Right? These are all compile related. It's not. It's won't allow you to run. Runtime exception. App runs. You could have actually an app run. You could have a complex app that almost everything works. It could be the very last thing on your app, on your screen, in your form. The very last thing you did that function. You did something there, and boom, it blew up. Right. So everything else worked great until you got to that. Right. So a syntax error is also called a build error or a compile error. A runtime error is also called an exception, right? So here's an example, a syntax error example. You forgot to put the semicolon, right? Forgot to put the semicolon. And that's how you correct it, right? Here's a runtime error. So let's see. This compiles fine but crashes if you enters a non-numeric text. Runtime error. So here you're converting something to a decimal. We'll learn how to handle this better in the future. We haven't learned that yet, but you're grabbing a text from a so this is always going to be a string value, right? Because we talked about that. This is always going to be a string value, but that string value has to be something that it can convert to a decimal. So if the value of this was, you put the number 1 in there, which comes in as a string, right? It's still going to be a string, but it can convert that. It knows what to do with a 1 or a 2, right? Any kind of a numeric number, it knows what to do with that, right? But if you put in the letter A here, right? Obviously, you're not doing it here. You're doing it on your form, right? If you put in the letter A or a B, a letter, anything that's not a number, this is going to crash. This will be a runtime error, right? But sometimes even within the editor, it kind of knows. They've gotten a lot smarter. Some years ago, the editors didn't pick up all these things. You had to find out the hard way on all this stuff. Right? Years ago, back in the day when I started, a lot of the stuff you would just kind of write all your code and you'd have to build it. And you got a problem, and then you have to fix your errors. Right? Nowadays, it's a lot easier because it kind of points out things for you. Right? So what's the idea of testing versus debugging? So testing is to find errors, okay? Debugging is to fix errors, right? So running the application with various inputs to discover runtime errors and verify it works correctly, okay? Now, as far as testing, there's different kinds of testing, Sometimes they have, you work at a company and sometimes you'll have a testing team, and they, some of those people might just do manual testing where they're manually testing things, right? There's all kinds of different tests and then also have that what's called like unit test, where a lot of times the unit tests are done by the developer itself, okay? And some of the unit tests are like, there's actually frameworks. There's frameworks that you can write testing code. You write code that are test cases that will test your code, okay? And you're, when things are, most companies, any company that's really up to date and doing the right thing, they're doing some automated testing. They've got some automated processes that run, before it gets turned over to somebody who might manually look at things. There's going to be a lot of automated stuff, and that automated stuff is based on sometimes the developers are writing test cases, right? It's code that tests code, right? You're writing these test cases to test your code, right? And a lot of times it's part of an automated process too, that they can kick off all those test cases by running You know, these can be done like with GitHub too. There can be that can be all defined within kind of GitHub that automatically kicks off test cases. Right? We ain't going to be doing a lot of that, but I'd like to look at a little bit of that. It'd be a good idea for you to kind of understand a little bit more about testing. Unfortunately, we only have so much time in these courses, and so a lot of that stuff kind of gets glossed over. But I'd like to spend a little more time on that because I think it's very important and out there in the industry. So, but debugging is actually finding the cause of error. So, you know, actually, let's say testing. Let's say you get to a test case, some test case fails, and someone informs you, hey, can you go look at this? It may not be your code you wrote, whatever. It could be somebody else's. Hey, could you go look at this code? We find an error. We had a build error, or we had a runtime error. Could you go look at the code, right? So then you go into this code, and maybe you're going to put some. There's different ways to do debugging. Okay, it could be just visually you look at it. Also, there's debugging tools that you can actually use that'll put breakpoints, and you can walk through your application while it's executing breakpoint by breakpoint, right? Especially for like the runtime stuff that's not evident, right? Build errors, you're going to kind of see that, but maybe, but what could happen after the fact is, the stuff that you're doing, let's say you write code and everything looks fine, but actually a build error, could be caused by other data. Well, that'd be a runtime error. So I better watch what I'm saying on that one. But runtime errors could be caused. You could be a lot of testing, everything works fine. But then all of a sudden, a runtime error, somebody put some different data than is expected. Especially when you've got applications where you got a big group of users entering, let's say you have a huge user base, like 100,000 people or even more than that, right? You got a huge, or it wouldn't even take that many, but users do all kinds of crazy things, right? They're gonna accidentally try to paste documents into a text field. They're gonna hit the wrong keys, all kinds of things. We do things ourselves accidentally, right? We've all been guilty of that, right? But users, you get a whole bunch of users, you'll see all kinds of crazy things, and sometimes that's uncover. They'll uncover certain errors that are wrong with the code, right? So, and then actually you come in and, like I said, debugging basically, you're going to start probably visually searching, or maybe you'll get an error, a list from somewhere. Hey, this was the error, and somebody cut and pasted. This was the error they were getting on the screen, and you'll look at that error. And sometimes there's log files that also have errors, and you'll look at those, and maybe you could just see from that. That's one way. The others, you might have to put some breakpoints in the code and test some certain scenarios. Lots of different options in that. I've kind of had to do all multiple different things to try to get some code working. Sometimes things aren't as obvious as you would think they would be. So remember, testing is finding bugs, debugging is fixing bugs. Data tip. So the data tips is, what you're talking about within the editor, you can actually displays a value of a variable and a property when you're in a debug mode, which we'll be doing some debugging. And if you hover over that, it'll tell you what the value of that is. So it's very helpful. So I talked about breakpoints and the data tips. Also, there's watch window, local windows, and exception helper. These are all things you can use for help for debugging. Getting very good at debugging is very, very beneficial for programming. Very beneficial. Save you a lot of time if you become good at debugging. Visual Studio help features, IntelliSense, Quick Info, F1 help, okay, error help, different options there. All right. Quick reference cheat sheet. So yeah, this was a pretty substantial. I actually didn't mean to go through this as much as I did, but I'm kind of glad I did. Because this has a lot more in it than that, like the PowerPoint's going to have. And this kind of really covers a lot of material that can be very, very helpful for that written test. So please use these. Next, we're going to go ahead and look at the Hands-on test. I just want to show you, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to kind of just set this up real quick for you. All right. So I'm going to go to my my repository. So where does it say to put this at? Does it say chapter 3? Right. Right. It says 03 on this thing, right? So I'm going to go to my online repository, and you got a hands-on test, right? Chapter 3. Now I don't know what you might have. It kind of depends on maybe how things were set up when you installed, but you should be able to, I can do this. If you can't, there are ways to still get around this. So I can have open with Visual Studio, right? It'll just open up that folder. And I suggest you don't have a whole bunch of folders open at once. Just going to cause, just room for error and accidentally changing things and being in the wrong place. So I always try to open up just, what I need to work on at that point in time. So you can open up here in Visual Studio. Remember, that's one way. If not, you can go open up Visual Studio. Here, let me copy that real quick. Kind of one of the things I guess is not so great is we always kind of do things in different directories. So usually it's like the stuff that you did work on, you're not working on. And, you can always, though, you can right click and remove from list, right? So just let you know, you'll have a bunch. If you're continually working on things, but you start getting some of the older stuff, you say, I'm not going to be doing anything with this. You can remove them from your list, okay? For me, I'm going to remove everything from my list. But obviously it's good if working on something, then you come back, you're going to have it, right? So here, we're going to create a new project, right? And here, obviously too, also usually a lot of times it'll come over with a blank solution, right? But if not, you just put in blank here, or solution, right? Whatever. There you go, blank solution. And then you want to make sure that you have the right directory here. You can click to browse to that, or if you cut and paste it as well. I'm just going to cut and paste mine. There's my hands-on test. Did I actually grab chapter 3? I did not. So that's kind of the bad thing of doing it that way. So, but I had it there. I'm going to make sure I do chapter 3. So select that folder. I'm good. So solution name, right? So that's where, like I said, it's important for these hands-on tests. Really do your best, because you're going to lose some points if you don't call things the right way, right? Or the right thing. So there you go. There's your solution name. Just doing that, you're getting points right there. You get a lot of easy points. So some of this thing's going to look kind of funky because I made it too big. I made it too big. I made it big so it's better for presentation purposes, but it kind of messes things up at certain points because of that. So no need to do that. Let me get rid of my picture because that can sometimes get in the way. Get rid of that. So we got your properties window. You're not even going to be doing toolbox right now, right? So I'm just going to close that. So, but here, so I got my solution, right? So then in here, let's see. Let me go back to our assignment. So EX1, EX2, EX3. So here we're going to do an add, new project. And we're doing console app again. All right, this was the correct one for that. We don't want to do the .NET framework one. We want to do this one, right? And then we're going to call this EX1. Hit next. Yep, create. Same thing for all three of these, right? New project, another console app, next. Everything else stays the same, we're good. Obviously, me doing it multiple times really is not helping you, but I got that far, might as well finish it. EX3. Next, great. So there you go. So just kind of wanted to review that because it might have been a while, you know, we kind of just did that one time and maybe we're already forgotten how to do that. So that it is. So right there, and I can't do any of the code for you, but I just kind of wanted to make sure, you know, just get you off the, a start here, get you started here, and then go from there. So, you know, right there, just that in itself, right? Solution and submission, right? You just, I kind of did help you. Got you some points just for having that basically there almost, right? So there you go. And then you can go from there. Like I said, if you have any questions about the instructions here, I'm fine with answering that. But as far as help with coding, I cannot help you with the coding. And please remember, this is due by Wednesday by midnight. Okay. The next thing I wanted to do is go look at the book apps. So in here, here's mine. So we've got this text box download. Here are these book apps. Okay. So here's the one for chapter 3. Okay. How do I want to open this? I think I'll open this like this. This time I'm just going to go ahead and click. No, I'll tell you what. You know what you can kind of actually do in these? Something that you can kind of learn here is whenever you've got a solution like this, you can double click this. Here, let me close my thing here. So I'm going to double click this. If I double click this, it'll bring up Microsoft Visual Studio. Okay. Now, as you can see, you must install or update .NET to run this application. Would you like to download it now? No. Because this is using, look, version 7 of .NET, right? We're at 10. We don't want to do it. You can do it to get this to work, but there's no reason to do that. Why don't we just go ahead and change the version of that, okay? So I'm going to click No. Then I'm going to come up here and click on Properties, okay? Solution Explorer, Properties, and Target Framework. Come down here to .NET 7.0 and choose 10, okay? And I think I usually don't change this down here, but it's probably good. Especially with version operating system, this project will target. I don't know. Let's just leave it, but we shouldn't be using an operating system that old. But that's okay. So there's that. All right. And save all. I don't even think you had to do that. Now, I'm not 100% sure that this is going to work. Sometimes you have to close things. I'm just going to actually do it that way. I'm going to close this now, though. I'm going to open this up again. So as you can see, you got a little red thing here because that means it's changed, right? And just to kind of review here, so if it's changed here, because this is part of your, that's one thing if you're doing any of these, okay? This is an assignment. You don't have to turn anything in these directories. This is just extra stuff for you to look at for examples, whatever, to try things or look at, full solutions, right? Things that have already been done, right? So that being red means it's changed because this is part of this, which has your .git, right? So everything in here and all subdirectories is being tracked by Git. So Git knows that this has changed, right? So if we go back, since we made a change there, if we go to GitHub Desktop, look. Oh, well, all these things that because I created all of them, right? Let me get rid of that just for now. Okay. You also have so this is that I just changed. It ends up changing the CS project file, okay? And this has, right? So this got changed to .10. I didn't change that, or maybe I re-clicked it. I actually did. Let me see. Oh, target framework. Yeah, I don't know, but right here, that's what it still is. I probably. No, I'm sorry. This is just telling you this is going to be deleted. This is going to be added, right? Delete and add. Sorry. So yeah, this is just telling you this is what it was, and this is what you changed it to. I knew that. I don't know why I got confused there for a minute. So that's that. So I'm just letting you know if you do some stuff you don't want to keep it. You don't even want to. You can check it in. You can just update it. My chapter 3 book app, whatever. You can just check it in if you want. The other option, and this can be a dangerous thing to use though, you can right click on here and click discard changes. Now discard changes is just going to, what it's basically going to do, it's just going to remove, it's just going to be like you didn't even do anything, right? But if you, on this, that's fine. But you never want to, if you discard changes on your work, if you've done a whole bunch of work and you right click and do discard changes on that, you're going to lose everything you had that you click discard changes on, right? So if you worked on some lab and for some reason, you want to be very careful whenever you're doing something because you have multiple things open, you accidentally did the wrong one, you just got to be very careful with that discard changes, right? But it's very helpful. Sometimes you have things, I didn't really mean to change that. So what that does is going to revert it back to the original. Okay, it's going to revert it back to the original. I say original, it's going to revert it back to the last GitHub, what's in GitHub, right? At that point. So just to let you know. So either way, if you play with some of these and they change them, you can just check it in if you want. Otherwise, you can right click and do discard changes on that, right? But be careful not to do any of the other stuff that you might be working on, right? Because this just all got created when I created that solution. All right. So I have that now. Let me go back here again. Chapter 3, invoice total. You can double click to open this up. Let's see what happens here this time. Okay. This was our designer. So there it is. It's happy now. Okay. So back over here, what we kind of did, remember kind of things we did here. We did this properties to do that in Solution Explorer. When we brought it up, got an error about the .NET version. So if you ever have an error on the .NET version, you can click on that. Okay. You can click on that to change your .NET version. All right. Let me close that. And it's a good idea to get in the habit of closing these different windows if you're not, using things. So yeah, this is the form designer. So you got to watch with these different things here. So here is the little form, right? You see this little thing here? That's your form itself, right? And this is where you got invoice total up here, left-hand side on the GUI. If you come down here in properties, if you clicked on this, this is all the properties of that form, okay? I know there's a lot of things in here. Can become a little confusing, okay? But this is all the properties of your form. And you'll have this little thing that looks like a form, right there, okay? So here's your name, invoice total. You should always, by default, just going to have form in here, so you always want to make sure you have that, right? And you can do a lot of other things, the font, anything, lots of different options here, right? Lots of different options. And it's a good idea maybe to come in some of these and just instead of, when you got the time, instead of messing with your own stuff and maybe getting it in a bad situation, getting yourself in a, in a corner, so to speak, if you kind of did something you didn't want to do, you can come into some of these and just kind of really start playing around, try some different things, right? You can always discard changes with it or whatever you want to do, right? Um, okay, um, so that's that, right? Um, also, there's this here. So this is where when you click on a button and it automatically creates the code, right? It automatically creates the code. And so I do want to mention we're looking at the old book apps, right? And some of these are older, right? And actually, even the book apps, they don't even always update these from one edition to another edition of the book, right? So these have the namespace. This is like the older way to do it, right? The more traditional older way, having the namespace and having your, you have to have it all defined like this. So it'll be a little different, maybe, right? But in here, so this is basically on the calculate, right? So basically here it's doing it's bringing your subtotal.text, right? It's using the right naming conventions for a text field, right? But this is that one there, okay? So I know that you have a lot of things here. It can be very confusing on here, but just remember if you want to get to the form designer or the form property, this is the form property itself, right? That's the form property itself, and these are all the values of the form, right? Here, let me close this. You get too much stuff open, right? We close this one. We double click on this, right? This is that project thing. We actually changed this one, right? This is the form, right? So when you click that, it should open up the form. And then, like I said, you come in here and once you have this will be everything on the right. So if I click in here, right, it's going to have all the properties of that text box, right? So here we have our name, text subtotal. Always remember text box when you name things. So this is the name. This isn't a name that goes anywhere. This is a name you're going to call it in your code. This is important for your code. That's why giving this a name that you know what it is going to be very important, because you're going to have to, when you're doing something where you're calling it, you need to know what it is, right? Then what else we have in here? Your tab index. Remember we looked at tab indexes. This has a tab index of 1. This would be the first one. Now these are events. I think some of this has changed how it used to be, though. No, we don't have an event on that. That's why. I wasn't thinking there. The event's going to be on this. So as soon as I click on this, so I was on this one. So you'll get used to these. It's going to take a while. So here's your properties. By default, usually come to properties, unless you start changing things. So the ones that are really important right here is this properties. This is where you're going to change, like for the calculate, for the text, right? What's the text on here? And if you remember the ampersand before the C is going to underline that, so that can be accessed by using an Alt, the Alt key, and a C, right? Use the Alt key and a C. Once this thing's running, you'll be able to calculate, right? And it's got text alignment, middle center, right? And you don't have to worry. I know there's a lot here. You don't have to worry about all of it. But tab. I would really learn about the tab index. Know where the tab index is. Tab stop. So if you set that to false, it won't stop that on that all. So if you have ones that you don't want to stop at all, you set that to false, right? Yeah, all kinds of different. By default, we're just using all the default stuff. You can change the different colors, right? Background color, right? There's different colors you can choose. See? It's going to take a while. You still be able to get through the labs. The things important. You got to understand about setting the text, right, on a button. You need to also understand. So once you click on this, when you're creating this and you click on this, it's actually going to generate code, right? It's going to generate code, and that's also viewable. Once you click on that, it's gonna create that button click event. And the way to actually see that is clicking on this here, and there's your button click event, right? And you'll see that within your designer code here, right? So if you double click on that, this one here, this is something you never want to change, okay? So here on this one, we know our text box, it says Window Forms Designer generated code. Never do anything on here, okay? Never do anything with this. Now, as you can see, look at what labels they had here. And actually, this is a good way to kind of see, though, what you kind of have. So this really didn't do things the right way either. They named first label 1, label 2, label 3, label 4. I guess it's fine if you're not really going to ever do anything with the labels, but sometimes you're going to actually do. Sometimes you're going to use labels for displaying text in a certain area, and you have a label. You want to have a name, so you don't know which one's label 2. Do you know off the bat? You'd have to go look at your editor. Oh, okay, which one? Your GUI. Which one was which one, right? So that's where you want to call it LBL and give it a descriptive name. The text box are all descriptive. Subtotal, discount percent, right? Discount amount. But these, you don't change them here. Never change it here, okay? So I'm actually going to click this. Yeah. All right. Okay, for the most part, you're not going to be doing anything with that one. Okay, this was the one we actually updated to get that on the screen. Did I not save that though? I hit Control S to save that. That was where I saved it to Windows 10. I don't know. I did close it and open it up again. I don't know why it wouldn't have worked though. All right. So here's our form. So we click on this. This is going to be our action, them events, right? Our button calculate click event, right? And here it's basically taking your text.subtotal.text, and then it's converting that to a decimal. So obviously, even though this would work, if somebody enters something that can't convert, you're going to get an error, right? Let's see what happens on that. Why not? I open the wrong things myself sometimes. All right, so we're going to just go ahead and run this. I should have run this before because once I changed that .NET version. Okay, good thing it's working. So here, look, first we'll enter something good here. So some of this stuff's hard-coded in the code, this discount percent. And as you can see, these things here, kind of like read-only here, right? The read-only, you can actually copy these, but you can't change the value in here, right? These are only read-only. Remember, I changed the button thing here. If I take this, though, let's say I put in a letter, and I hit calculate. Uh-oh, got an error right here. That's because, like I was talking about earlier when we were looking at the guide, when we were talking about it there, if you enter something that's not a number, this can't convert it. This is an exception. This is called a runtime error, right? Saying a compile error. This is because this is a runtime error. So things like this can be, we can write our code differently to prevent that. We're not going to do that right here today, but I'm just kind of showing you for, as an example. Okay. Hit continue. I don't know what that's going to do there, but all right. Let's stop that. All right. So back to this. Let's kind of look at this some more. So always remember to open this up, right? Click on this. That's going to open that up. And then if you, click on any of these, you're going to see all the properties, right? So here, this one here is read-only, right? Let's go find that read-only. It's going to be down here, right? Did I blow by it? Probably. Nope. I know there's a lot of stuff here. And it's different than they've changed things too on me. It's probably going to be read-only equals true. There it is. Read-only is true. So it's going to be read-only. So all of these are read-only. Okay. Just remember when you click on these obviously you have to be in the designer mode, right? You're going to have all your properties and you can play with them there. Okay. Here's your button exit. And then the view. So usually your buttons are fields. Sometimes you have some text fields. Sometimes you have text fields that you might have some event on it. If somebody enters something, you're going to do something. But a lot of times, usually your buttons, you're always going to have events on your buttons, right? So always remember to look at the events on a button. Come over here in your properties window, and you got this is the thing for the events here. Okay, and if you hover over there, you'll see events. You click on that, and it'll show you your calculate event. Here's for exit, your exit one. Okay.